can do a Q&A with Phil Carter if you like. With Phil Carter. Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. My name's Sara Hendrikesen. I'm a Senior Director at ServiceNow. And with me today is Phil Carter, who is a Global Go-to-Market Lead. And he also has 20 years experience at IDC leading AI, data, and automation. He spends his time thinking about how AI is transforming both organizations and people. We also have Magnus Backman, who is our Vice President of Solutions Consulting, and he's really embedded in the Swedish institutional reality. Magnus works directly with public sector organizations navigating digital transformation and AI adoption. So, we're here today to discuss a topic that's certainly hot on the Almedalsveckan agenda, but also globally, which is private and public institutions alike around AI governance. So it's a topic emerging as a key priority for organizations. Visibility and need is high, but by contrast, typical organization readiness is low, which we have seen. And we're also seeing a growing AI governance gap that really needs to be addressed. So the objective of today's panel is to share a few ideas about how to close that gap. So let's get started. Phil, maybe it's good to start with, when we talk about AI governance, what do we actually mean?
Yeah, so I think it's a big question for a lot of organizations that we speak to across different levels, from the CC level all the way down to the various structures. And I think that there are three layers to it, the way that I would look at it. There's the technical governance layer, which is effectively looking at the models, the data, and the agentic systems that are being built off those technologies in terms of, are they working the way they should? Is the agentic efficacy driving the outcomes that are expected by the business? And that needs to cover security, it needs to cover identity of the agents, it needs to make sure that you are managing hallucinations and other potential issues that come out of the AI systems. That's the first layer. Then the second layer is the business layer, which are these investments that we're making in AI delivering ROI? So what is the value that is being generated? How much are we spending on these systems? Because we're seeing a significant ramp up in terms of cost and this emergence of agentic FinOps as a new category emerging. And then the third layer is the external governance, which is how do we then comply with external regulations? It could be NIST, it could be the EU AI Act, which we'll talk about. And that's more where the more forward-looking organizations are going in terms of, okay, not just the technical and business perspective, but also what's our risk posture externally as well.
And if we were to, that's a really good introduction to it, but what would you describe and how does AI governance look like inside organizations?
Well, maturity is low, as you described. It is actually my word of the year for 2026, AI governance. I suppose two words, but it's basically starting to become clear that you don't get to scale without governance. So organizations, individuals, structures need to understand that the guardrails have to be put in place in order for you to build AI systems that can scale over time. But the problem is that it doesn't have a current home in an organization. So no one takes ownership for AI governance. It could fit in legal, it could fit in cybersecurity, IT sometimes might take it on. There might be an AI center of excellence that owns AI governance. And so I think that's part of the challenge with the maturity, is that it's currently spread and fragmented as a theme across multiple entities in an organization.
And Magnus, from your perspective, what do you see happening in Sweden, particularly in public sector?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And to connect to what Phil say as well, it's where does AI governance fit? Because compliance often sits with legal, security with IT, and then you have operations, which is a blend of IT and business. But if we look at Sweden and public sector as well, there's hundreds of municipalities and institutions that all operate in a sovereign way. They have their own personnel, they have their own IT systems, meaning also they have their own governance teams and processes around it as well. So this is where we start. And AI governance cannot be treated like a black box. It's not a technology project. When we speak about governance, it's something that needs to be embedded across everything. So governance, as we see it, and especially connected to the EU AI Act that's coming, is something that needs to be embedded in infrastructure, if we look at it like that. So we still have some time. So the Cloud Act is live. The AI Act is. We still have a 1 year to go. So I think we have a year to really start documenting. First. Getting visibility, what kind of AI services are already in practice. In public sector, there's not too many cloud services, but it's going to be those that are produced or deployed internally. If it's from outside, it's often more shadow AI. And then also map how it should look like, because if you need to govern, you need to understand everything. What data will it touch? What kind of sensitive information will it do? How does the application landscape, which is something everyone have struggled with for the past 20 years to classify data as well. And then also, AI, especially in public sector, we will look at where do we involve humans as well, because we will have AI do a lot of the work, groundwork, triaging documents and make assessments. But in the end, we will need to insert a human in the loop as well to make the decision, especially when it touches citizen decisions as well. And but I think we come from as Sweden, we come from a position of strength as well, because we have a lot of this in our culture. We document. Decisions are, democratic. We are very transparent around it, and a lot of this can be just applied into governance as well.
And I think to your point on autonomy and human in the loop, a lot of technology providers out there are talking about autonomy, and we talk about autonomous workflows. But what you tend to find as it relates to AI governance is that most organizations aren't quite ready for autonomous systems. And so the human in the loop needs to be a factor, at least for the immediate future, while we set these guardrails in place around AI governance.
Agree.
Magnus, you just touched on this, but Phil, you have a global position at ServiceNow, and your experience of IDC, working with multiple organizations. I'd love for you to talk to us more about how the EU AI Act has an impact on organizations' obligations moving forward. Big one, sorry.
I think just for the record, I'm not in a position to give legal advice on how your organizations might comply with the EU AI Act, but we can give you some perspectives on what to watch out for, because the way that the EU AI Act is structured is not necessarily uniformly across all organizations and all use cases. So firstly, you need to work out whether you're classified as a provider, a deployer, or a user, right? So that's the first level of segmentation. Most organizations will fit into that deployer category. We would be a provider, but then the deployer category then has a different type of risk attached to it versus the other categories. But then within that risk level categorization, there are unacceptable risk use cases with things like facial recognition, right? But then you go down to high risk, medium risk, and no risk, and then the compliance obligations are aligned to those risk categories. So it's a good time to start thinking about segmenting your AI use cases according to those risk categories, because although to your point, the compliance with the EU AI Act only comes in December 2027, that gives you 18 months to start this process, so that by the time it comes through, that you're set up to be able to respond according to the compliance obligations. We saw what it was like with GDPR, right? It's a reference point in terms of organizations getting GDPR ready and then not necessarily being in a good position when the regulation emerged. So we have a reference point, and organizations need to start thinking about those organizational types and then the use case categories as well.
It's very, very pragmatic advice. Thank you.
Not legal, by the way,
no,
just for the record.
Not at all. Magnus, what does this mean for Swedish public organizations, and are you ready for it?
All right, so if we have a starting point, Sweden is a highly digital mature society. You know, we have the educational system, we have the trust in the government, we have the all of the opportunities for startups and a lot of it. So we do have a huge talent pool. If I start looking, on the bad side, so we do have some challenges with introducing AI, which will augment the work of our employees and workers in public sector, but also create new ones or shift some of them. We have both kind of a skills and competence need. So with skills, I mean upskilling to be able to fit in that new augmented work or work that person or groups will do. And I don't see too many path or plans or framework on that upskilling, because it's going to be an important one to both get the framework but always learning. Then a competence piece as well. We have a lot of a big competence pool around this. But the competence is a lot about building. You don't have too many competences. How do we put this in a governance perspective and driving real value? How do we take it from pilots into full production in a more public sector environment as well? And then when we look at the highly distributed, Sweden, public sector Sweden, most will look at driving AI use cases, at least to begin with, in a sovereign way, meaning in their own basements or in the neighboring basement. And that AI also requires, depending on what kind of AI you're going to run it, you're going to train on it, but it requires very specialized infrastructure as well. That comes with a budget. So specialized infrastructure, access to data, and also the skill sets around it. And the last piece that kind of hindering and making everyone freeze a bit is the kind of legal aspects around it. So it's a lot of legal aspects to navigate, GDPR, data protection, and now the Cloud and AI Act as well. But we also see, coming to the positive sides, starting with Almedalen, have you been in any debate or panel or session that is not talking about AI, but not only the concepts and the where we can go with it, but the actual problem and how we're going to solve it. So it's that's a great start. And we also see in public sector a lot of good examples. You're going to have one here. I think they spoke on this stage, AI-verkstaden. So this is the kind of a government initiative from Sweden, where they asked some of the biggest agencies in Sweden, so the Swedish Tax Agency, Transportation Agency, and also the Social Security Agency, come together, start acting as a government cloud, and create public sector services, including AI. So they are also quite ready to deploy and set up both a lab for public sectors to co-create and drive ideas and pilots, production environments to either host it or drive it and start integrating it, but also kind of a SWAT team. Think of it as experts, consultants, advisors as well, to help public sector go from pilots to production and then incorporate it in the different entities. So, great buzz, there's good energy, and I really see, the strength of the Swedish society. If you look at everything, we set up for a good scale out.
Yeah, I think that government cloud initiative also helps to create a sense of future direction for any government entity, thinking about their progression towards leveraging cloud, but also AI as part of the next wave of innovation.
I agree. So we spoke a lot. So I've been in a lot of different healthcare sessions as well, which is, we have great healthcare here, but we also 21 regions, all operating in the same way as well. If I look at, countries like neighboring countries like Norway as well, they start to come together, like the whole health sector, to just, work together as teams across regions, but also co-develop, share infrastructure, share the investment, but also, pressure us as vendors, like a whole nation's healthcare. So that's also going to be an important piece to come together with all of these, distributed skills, distributed resources we have as well, move it forward.
Shared best practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Magnus just touched on this, Phil. Cloud sovereignty is digital sovereignty rather is a massive focus right now, and I'm just curious, what impact does that have, or what's your point of view on operational efficiency and also the and flexibility and the choices that we make when it comes to AI?
Sure. Yeah, I think firstly there is this perspective that you can either have your digital infrastructure in the basement, to your point, like under in the office, and that's good, or you can have it in the cloud, and that's bad, right? So there's that kind of black and white perspective that's how sovereignty needs to work, but the reality is that it's not that black and white, and we need to think about sovereignty in terms of the workloads and the use cases across that spectrum, with a focus on choice or self-determination, but also the flexibility to move those workloads across multiple potential delivery models. And I think part of that is defining what sovereignty means for any organization and where you draw the line in terms of infrastructure, data, increasingly AI, and how users access the different systems. Because once you have that level of understanding, you can start to work out where the workloads might fit across the different delivery models. To your point, though, you have to ask the question, will you pay a premium, which is likely going to be the case, for a real sovereign offering as opposed to some of the other delivery models? And that's part of the budgeting that would need to be taken into account. And so I think from our perspective, the way that we look at it is you can run our capabilities on-prem, like in that basement, but you can run it through a hosted partner or in the public cloud, because fundamentally what sovereignty comes down to is not just self-determination, but choice. Like you want choice so that you are not necessarily locked into one form of delivery model versus another.
And just, diving a bit deeper on this topic of AI governance and organizations and the choices we have. Phil, what's your point of view on the intersection between AI governance and then your organization structure?
Okay, so this is a time for an important prediction. Okay, so hold on to your hats. You can quote me on this. So my view is that by 2030, so in the next 4 years, that AI governance will be a completely new function in every large organization with the same level of visibility and budget as cybersecurity. So you will have a chief AI governance officer who will sit alongside the CISO and the CIO in the C-suite, and will have that ownership that I talked about earlier. And people talk about, okay, what are the new jobs that are emerging as a result of AI? Well, we need to fill that governance function with data governance experts, with AI governance experts, with the business use cases that are required to create the guardrails that I talked about. And so I think that we need to find ways to give ownership to new structures in the short term, but building towards this new function, which, if you think about the risks associated with AI, every CEO is going to be looking to put in place, because if they don't, then the problems will arise, right? I don't want to be too many scare tactics, but I think that function will exist over the next few years.
Okay, so you heard it here first from Phil Carter. Magnus, we have spoken about people here, but what does this really mean for people, and specifically what's required of our civil servants? Are they ready for it? Can you comment on this one, please?
Yeah, sure. So, I spoke about upskilling, because, independently where we're going to, put AI into the processes, it's going to augment, some of the work that will require new skills. Some of the work we used to do, we're not going to need to do anymore. We can, focus on other things. So that will be this constant learning loop. And, back to the point as well, the governance piece needs to come up to the C-suite. But also when it comes to the direction, how we also look at AI in simple terms, like what is the acceptable use, what's the direction, what's the training path, needs to come from the highest top, either within a municipality or from the Swedish government itself as well. So it needs to come there. And I speak from at it. If I look at coming in as a vendor and often speak to customers, we're finding use cases for AI. And sometimes when we take the effort to look, through many different areas within a customer, we find more use cases, and they have commonalities, and they're gonna, they need the same kind of governance, same kind of platform as well. And often when we also pull these kind of workshops together, these people sometimes, if it's a large enough organization, haven't met before. But they're working on the same things, but they are spinning up ideas and slightly different directions. That's why I say this needs to come up to the C-suite already now, because then it's gonna throttle down into the organization. Then, if I look at the individuals, employees, everyone, leaders, we need to go into a constant learning phase. Everyone in IT comes from that, but the pace is so much higher, and the gap's getting bigger and bigger as well. So everyone needs to be in a mindset to always learning, be curious, and take on that. And I think we as vendors, the private sector, system integrators across Sweden, we also have a big role to play here. All of us have great curriculums, education as well. We should invest in public sector, in private sector as well, to make those available, because that's going to be agnostic training path, how to learn, what does things mean, etc. And then there's going to be teams. Don't build small superhero teams that takes on this new technology. Build teams that carries all functions, including legal, including operations, including the business, including IT as well, because they're gonna see different opportunities and different challenges, and together gonna come with a solution.
Very good.
Yeah.
We've given this audience quite a few perspectives, from preparing for the EU AI Act, segmenting our use cases for AI, preparing for the future in terms of upskilling, which I think is great guidance to prepare us for, AI governance. But I'd love for Magnus, you to go first, but both of you just to summarize, what's the one thing that anyone watching this and in our audience could do to prepare for AI governance?
All right, back to the boring ask. We need to understand how data applications, people, processes, workflows correlate to each other. We need to document it, because that's going to be important when we apply it with governance, and especially when we make governance in the infrastructure. When we put in AI in place, we need to be able to understand what data does it touch, how will the identity of agents and people look like, so we have a map of that. So this is the kind of first step where we need to start. The other thing I would say is, if you already have AI in place, don't bolt on governance. If you don't have AI in place, or look at the next big use case, often a low risk, high impact case, implement governance in the infrastructure, in the process, in the workflow from day one, and then also document your learnings across it, because that's going to help in scaling it.
Those are two things.
That was two things.
Yeah. They were great. They were really good. But
thanks for following the brief on that one, Magnus.
Yeah.
Phil, can you stick to one? No,
I'll try. One sentence. So do not use the lack of AI governance as an excuse to not move forward with AI.
I love that.
It's a good one.
Statement. Thank you. We have come to end of time. Thank you so much, Phil and Magnus, for your words of wisdom, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.